Good evening, and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy. Today is March 24th, 2017. Now, last week, I showed you a video of Nigel Farage interviewing Marine Le Pen, who is running for president of France. Today, I'd like to show you a short clip of a woman who's very famous. She's an activist for women's rights throughout the world and was voted a few years ago by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people on earth. Her name is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she literally ran away from the restrictive nature and abusive nature of her family, who were Muslim. And she was being forced into a marriage with a person in Canada she had never even met. And she actually deplaned in, I think, Germany, Cologne or something, and then smuggled herself over the border and got political asylum in the Netherlands. And she began by cleaning apartments and in the Netherlands, and then eventually rose in her status, got an education, a very good education, and eventually became a member of the Dutch Parliament, and then eventually moved to the United States. She has written books, very popular books, and very important because her perspective is not really being discussed, particularly among the leftists and among feminists, even though she is a feminist, but she is not the right sort of feminist for the American very left-wing feminist ideology that the third wave feminists are involved in. So this woman is scorned by leftists and embraced by conservatives because of her views, because she is very clear about her information that she is trying to get across, that there is a form of Islam that is very much in the classic fascist mode. It's the textbook definition of religious fanaticism. You have an ideology, your whole life is devoted to this. You believe anyone who doesn't believe as you do to be an enemy and even worthy of being persecuted or marginalized or even killed or jailed or punished in some way. And it's a very, very strict and very abusive ideology, which is particularly abusive to women. And one of the most famous incidents in Ayaan Hirsi Ali's life is she wrote a script for a movie. And the movie was called Submission. And it's a short film about the exploitation of Muslim women and the dilemma of being a Muslim woman who believes in Allah and yet having to live under a very abusive system that keeps you a virtual slave, sort of locked in your house. You cannot leave unless you have the permission of a male relative like your father or uncle or brother, and you always try to stay in the house as much as possible. And this is the seclusion, the harem that it would be. I'm assuming that this is like the idea of the harem, where you have women who are just basically locked into a room or a building and kept away from society and basically don't go out. And if you do go out, you have to be covered from head to foot, and no one can see you, so that no other person can see you. And the movie Submission actually caused its director, Theo van Gogh, who was a guy from the Netherlands, a filmmaker, to be assassinated, to be He was on his bike on his way to work. This Muslim guy shot him. He falls off his bike. The Muslim guy walks toward him with the gun in his hand. He's got a knife as well. Theo Van Gogh reportedly said, wait, let's talk about this. And the guy shoots him about 6 more times, or 7 more times, then tries to cut his head off with a knife, then sticks the knife into his chest and puts a note on it, on the knife. And it's a warning to Ayaan Hirsi Ali that she will be next. Now, by some miracle, Ms. Ali has been able to stay alive for all these years and is alive to this day. I've seen her speak, but it was many years ago, and she seems a lot more polished and sophisticated, and her message is much more clear. And you're going to see a short video, and it's going to be surprising because she actually supports Trump's travel ban. And she says it's the right idea. It was clumsily put in place. They should have vetted it when they talked to some more lawyers and tried to get it through before they put it in. I think the reason why is because Trump wanted it in place as soon as possible. He probably realized that it would be challenged, so he thought, let's just go ahead and put it in there. It's going to be challenged no matter what I do, and she probably doesn't see this. But she makes some very important and interesting points. And she said that what you're doing with these Islamists are appeasing them. And all this does is encourage them. And they just saying that this is the will of Allah, that they should be allowed to take over and initiate and put Sharia law into the operation of governments. And their plan is to take over country by country and eventually take over the world. And what we're doing now is appeasing them. And this she's very concerned about because of the way that the Islamists treat women. And I think it's really anyone, the way that they treat just anyone who does not agree with them, even other Muslims, because not all Muslims believe that the purpose of Islam is to take over the whole world. And destroy and kill all your enemies. I saw part of the movie Submission. I didn't know whether to show it or not on this show. It is rather disturbing because it shows, a woman, the results. It doesn't show the woman getting beat up, but it shows the results of her being whipped, of her being raped, of her being beat up by her husband. And it's sort of an inner dialogue. It's sort of the woman's thoughts and her dilemma of being a devout Muslim who believes that Allah will protect her, and then going through so much suffering because she is very strictly following the regulations or the rules that she is supposed to follow because she's a very devout Muslim woman. So this was so disturbing to the Islamofascists that one of them actually executed the director on a street in, I'm assuming, Amsterdam. So let's run the short little interview with Tucker Carlson, and you're going to be pretty impressed, I think. And he was very impressed. He said this is very wise. You can tell by the way she talks how genuine she is. So let's run the clip.
Well, today's attack in London has provided yet another reminder, as if we needed one, of the danger posed by radical Islam. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has extensive experience with the dark side of that religion. She was raised in Somalia and later Kenya as a devout Muslim, but later risked her life by becoming an apostate and helping to create a documentary criticizing Islam. She says the religion must undergo a reformation. She says President Trump's travel ban has the right idea, even if it was implemented badly. Ayaan Hirsi Ali joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker, for having me.
So why is it that so many on the left internationally, in this country, in Great Britain, all through Europe, have so much trouble coming to terms with the religious component of this violence?
I don't know. I acknowledge, as you do, that it's masochistic, it's stupid. And I think that if you look at the Islamists, they don't go to the liberals and say, thank you so much for letting us, take over. We'll stop terrorizing you. They don't do it.
So what you're saying is the Islamists don't want sensitivity above all. That's not their goal.
No, the Islamists want thing. They want one thing, and that is a Sharia-compliant society and eventually the world. That's what their aim is. It sounds crazy to you and me and everyone else, but that's their objective. And they want to get there through dawah. This is an infrastructure of indoctrinating people into accepting it, and other ways of intimidating and, forcing them to do it, and jihad, violence. And whoever is in their way is their enemy. And it doesn't matter how nice the liberals are, how accommodating and obliging they are, that's the objective of the Islamist. And if you don't understand that, then I don't think you should be in the business of making legislation or in the business of, the leadership, in thought leadership, because you're just incapable of understanding that problem. Well,
that would disqualify virtually everyone in charge of making policy in this country, except for about 4 people. So it's interesting that you say
not
that.
Everyone.
but most. I mean, there is this feeling that we don't have the moral standing in the West to criticize Islamism.
And they remind us that we don't have that moral standing because the Islamist sees non-Muslims and non-Muslim ideas, even non-Islamist ideas, as illegitimate, as against the idea of God.
Yes.
And I think we empower them because every time we appease and appease and appease, they see that as, they see God's hand, the way their perception of God, they see God's hand making it easy for them to advance their agenda. They don't see that here, is a decent, civilized society that is trying to understand them and give them time.
Yes.
And try to persuade them to put their weapons down. That's not how they see it.
Fascinating. So you had qualified support for President Trump's travel ban. Why?
Well, I think I listened to his speech in Youngstown, Ohio, when he was a candidate, and he, first of all, named the problem. He said, we are at war with radical Islamic ideology, and he put that ideology in the same sequence as fascism and National Socialism and communism, and he said, this is the ideology of the day. And so he went, with the travel ban. It was clumsily. He should have had a few lawyers look at it, legislators. Yes. He should have done it differently. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there are sometimes failing or weak states. And it's incredibly difficult to vet people who are coming from there. He has intelligence and information that we don't have. So if he says, these are the 7 countries that I'm going to impose a temporary travel ban on until we have sorted out a vetting system, and that is vetting for ideology, then I don't see any problem with that. And I wouldn't look for all sorts of hidden things behind that.
It seems like getting people from foreign countries, not just Islamic countries, but maybe especially Islamic countries, to buy into the values of the West is really important. Do you think we do enough?
I don't think we do enough. I think, again, to go back to that, the president, when he was a candidate, to go back to that speech, he did mention assimilation. He said we have to have, Muslims, foreigners, aliens to come and assimilate. They must want to come here, and they must want to love our society. And I think we don't do enough. In fact, in the West, and I've been here for 20-something years, I forget that long, what I see is an apology and an apologetic attitude toward Western civilization, and that is wrong. Then you are seen as weak, and you're inviting aggression if you do that.
Yes. Our leaders hate themselves and the country they run, and so they inculcate that in new arrivals. It was wonderful to have you. That was really wise. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was a very interesting clip, I thought, with Ayaan Hirsi Ali talking with Tucker Carlson. You could tell that he's impressed by her attitude and the genuine quality of her message that she's trying to get across. She's been attacked by leftists a lot because her narrative really doesn't fit in with the agenda, with the purpose and the direction that they want the world to go. And many people are, of course, under the influence, without really knowing it, of powerful forces who want to stay in the shadows. Their names don't get in the newspapers anymore. They are usually arranged in families, so they're hereditary groups of very aristocratic, they may not have titles, but sometimes they do, but they're extremely wealthy. Now, they are the most wealthy people on the planet. Now, I believe that after David Rockefeller died, the title of the world's wealthiest man was given to Bill Gates. Now, this is almost a joke because David Rockefeller, of course, has a son. He has relatives. I don't remember what his name is. But that wealth didn't just vanish when David Rockefeller died. Come on. No, it's passed on. David Rockefeller was 101. This was just last week, I think, when he died. These people tend to live, most of them, a very, very long time, probably because they have access to life extension technology that most people do not have access to. But he eventually went and is facing his maker, and his wealth is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. So the idea that now Bill Gates is the world's most wealthiest man is just ridiculous and absurd. They never even mention the Rothschild family. You never hear anything about Lord Evelyn de Rothschild or any of the other Rothschilds who were billionaires back in the early part of the 19th century. We're in the 21st century now. So you're talking over 200 years ago, they were worth $1 billion. Can you imagine how much they're worth now? And they are these are the banking families, and they own multinational corporations, and they virtually own countries, and they have control of the creation of currency and credit throughout the world in many, many places. They have tremendous influence over the countries, all the countries of the world. Why? Because whenever these countries want to borrow money, they have to go to these banks, these international banks, and they become debtor nations. We're all indebted to these people, to this very small group of maybe a few hundred people at the most, who stay in the shadows. They used to be much more in the public eye 100 years ago. But they've learned that they don't want to be in the public eye anymore, and rightly so. Because then, if people knew who they were, or that they even existed, they might find themselves targets of disgruntled human beings. So what we're dealing with is a world in which the very top of the pyramid, so to speak, is in the shadow, is hidden. And what we get to see is a second tier of power. So we really don't know who the unseen puppet masters are at the top. What we get to see is the tiers below that, the second tier, the third tier, the fourth tier. And the Islamofascists, this small group, it originally started out to be a small group, or several small groups, of marginalized fanatics. Somebody has gone to them and said, we really like what you're doing, and we think that we can help you, and here's money, here's training, here's weapons. We'll even send advisors to help you overcome your adversaries and take control of this country. And we can see an example of this back in the 80s when the Mujahideen who were Islamists, very, very religious fanatics, ideologically driven, they were contacted by the Western powers, the United States, who were still fighting what they called the threat of communism, the threat of international communism. The Reds, the commies, they were the bad guys. And they were fighting for control of Afghanistan. And so they said, look, we can help you out, and we'll help you take over this country, Afghanistan. We'll help you throw out the Russians. The Russians were in control of Afghanistan at that time. The Mujahideen, these are kafir. These are infidels, kafir dogs. Anyone who is not a Muslim is a kafir. And so they were, I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but anyway. So with American and Allied help, British, French, etc., the Mujahideen were able to throw out the Russians. And then you had a country that was basically just demolished. And so when the Americans were ready, they came in and took over and started fighting with these people. And the fight is ongoing. So you have the war that's just created by the same people who are fighting against the bad guy force. The bad guys are created by the so-called good guys. Then the good guys come in and fight with the bad guys. And how much of it is actually a show for the public consumption? How much of it is actually a market which is being deliberately created so that the products of war, the masters of war, will have an endless supply of customers. And that's what we're in right now. We are in what they call the long war. You look at the military magazines and the people who really talk about this rather than just skirting around it, and they don't pretend it's not happening, but because they're into it. They're into the idea that the war is going to be going on for 50 to 100 years. So the Islamist terrorists, and this is, were created by the West. We're not created by the West, but they were funded and trained. They give them all kinds of little goodies, including billions upon billions of dollars in funds. And this allows them, these small fringe groups, to actually hire fighters, because there are plenty of mercenaries out there. There are plenty of young men with no jobs all over the world who are looking for something to do with their lives. And if they can actually fight for a cause that they sort of believe in, all the better. But many of them, they're not particularly caring about Islam. They could care less one way or the other. What they like is that paycheck. So what we're seeing is the growth of Islamofascism that was perpetrated by very powerful bankers and industrialists, military-industrial complex, who need instability in order for them to survive. They have so many different reasons for what they do. You might say, well, why would they want to do that? Why wouldn't they want a peaceful world? They don't see a peaceful world as in their best interests. Because if there were peace, if there was stability, then gradually people would, their eyes, their minds, would begin to figure everything out. They would say, well, we have peace, things are pretty good, but, things could be better. Where is the problem? People have just a natural inclination to try to fix things. Men are really amazing at this, mankind in general. When they see a problem, they want to fix it. If there is no problem, they're going to they're going to keep looking for a problem to fix. And sooner or later, if there were world peace, then our eyes would look up. They would see that there's a whole group of people who are criminals and psychopaths who are trying to call the shots, pulling the strings, the international bankers, the masters of war, the makers of the implements and weapons of war, who are trying to keep things destabilized. And these are the culprits. These are the ultimate culprits. And this goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Nothing new here. Nothing new here. Always been this way. So there must be, we would go and we would bring them down. They would be dragged to trial. The rule of law would begin to take effect against the very source of political troubles and instability and war in the world. I mean, just take a look at something like the horrific wars of the 21st century, or the 20th century. World War I. Why did World War I happen? What was that all about? No one, or very few people, really know what that was all about. And yet, a whole generation of young men in Great Britain, in Germany, in other countries that were drawn in to that incredibly devastating war, a whole generation was essentially destroyed, killed. Millions of men, young men. Why? There is a reason. But it was because of bankers, industrialists, aristocrats at the very top. They were the cause. It wasn't the ordinary people, the farmers, the townsmen who were living in Great Britain and living in Germany and were dragged into World War I. And yet, did those people at the very top, did they pay for their crimes? No, they did not. Were they taken into account for mass murder? They were not. And you could look, World War II is a little more complicated, but if there had been no World War I, there would have probably not been any World War II. World War II was sort of part two of World War I, because everyone was so exhausted after World War I that it took a while for a whole new generation to be grown up and people to rebuild themselves and just get themselves in a place where they could continue the war and finish it. Now, those very same people, or their descendants, are also looking at the world. They're still looking at the world and their goal, to continue to maintain their control, to increase their wealth, to increase their power, and eventually to have the entire world under the control of a few hundred men. At the most, a few hundred men. Some people say it's as many as 6,000. I think that maybe includes their families. It might be as many as, 50 men whose names we mostly don't know. But they're there. If you search, you can find them. And then you have the people who work for them. I mean, Dick Cheney is still alive, and he is essentially a Rockefeller operative. Just as one example. And I've seen the video in which he's kowtowing before David Rockefeller. And you can tell just by their body language that Dick Cheney is essentially working for David Rockefeller. And David Rockefeller was a very well-known globalist. He wanted to get rid of countries. And you might think, well, that's a good idea, just get rid of all the countries, then no more war. No, that's not why wars happen. Wars don't happen because there are countries. Wars happen because some people who are above the level of patriotism to any particular country create the conditions that make war inevitable. They're very good at manipulating people who don't understand how the world works and believe the propaganda. And so you have organizations that are run by this small group of men. And one of the biggest organizations, and maybe the biggest in the world, organization that's run by the small group of maybe 50 guys, or maybe 20, maybe 100, is the CIA. The CIA, at the very top, does not have the interests of the American people at heart. CIA is an international organization devoted to furthering the interests of its masters, of its secret masters. Now, the ordinary CIA agent may not even know this. They have no idea. He believes he's working for the United States of America. Just like the ordinary soldier in World War I, for instance, thought he's fighting for his country. He doesn't know he's fighting to perpetuate the aims of the internationalists or the globalists who are hidden from his sight above and looking down like gods on these fools who are running around like ants that can be destroyed and crushed at will. And they're getting off on that. They love it. They laugh about it. They think it's so funny. And they say, look at how stupid they are. Look at these people. They're like ants, millions of them, billions of them. And we can manipulate them, and they're so stupid they don't even see us. They don't even know we're here. Just like ants. They don't know you're here till you crush them. Then you know. Then they know, maybe for a second before they die. That's the relationship that most human beings on this planet have to these godlike beings who are owning this planet. And they're just ordinary people. And they're very sick people, too. Don't get me wrong. They're not gods. Gods might have some beneficial intention, but these people have no beneficial intention to you. To themselves and their friends and their family, sure. They're all about them, their class, but not to ordinary people. And this is why it's so essential for human beings to understand. We could have a world in which there were no countries, but we're definitely not ready for that. There is not enough education out there for people to be able to hold this in their heads, because this is an extremely complex system. And until we have a grasp of at least a little bit of how it works, the ordinary person is not going to be able to deal with it. If you don't understand how it works, you're just going to be exploited. You're going to be tricked. You're going to be deceived. You're going to be lied to, and you're not going to know you're being lied to. And you're going to willingly give up your freedom. And privacy, by the way, is freedom. You can put an equal sign between the word privacy and freedom. Privacy equals freedom. So when the U.S. government tells us, or the CIA tells us, or the NSA tells us, or the FBI, or anybody else tells you that privacy is a thing of the past, you can just replace that word with the word freedom, because that's what privacy is. It's the definition of freedom. That you can do what you want without being watched. Anytime you're watched, that means that someone can take advantage of you, of what you're doing, and they can exploit you, they can harm you, you can be hurt in some way. That's what the U.S. government and other governments value more than anything else is privacy. In other words, secrecy. That's another synonym for privacy, secrecy. U.S. government under Obama was the most secret of any government, supposedly, even more secret than George W. Bush's. Even though Obama said we're going to be the most transparent government in American history, it turned out to be completely the opposite. So I've been told. There was a war on whistleblowers under the Obama administration. More whistleblowers are prosecuted with greater vigor than ever before in American history. And many supporters of the Obama administration were very surprised at that because they didn't think that a Democrat would want to do that. It seems to go against democratic values. It seems like Republicans were always the ones that would persecute or prosecute whistleblowers. And now things seem to have switched. They switched around quite a bit. The conservatives are supporting people like Ayaan, Hirsi, Ali. The Democrats and the leftists are against her. They don't want her message to be heard. They want to stifle her message that the Islamists could be the new fascists, could be the new Nazis, could be the new communists. But if you look at the larger picture, you can see how they're being supported by the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet. The CIA is involved in funneling money, weapons, and training to the Islamofascists to make their movement grow. And why would that be? Why would that be? For one thing, they thrive on war, on conflict, on instability. When the communists fell, when the Soviet Union fell in 1990, 1991, I have it on good authority that the CIA people were just freaking out because suddenly their reason for existence had vanished. It had just dissolved like the morning dew and evaporated. They had the world was potentially at peace. There was no more major international conflict to give them a purpose. And the CIA, just like a living being, wants to continue to live. Doesn't want to die. It doesn't want to be marginalized or have its budget cut, or doesn't want to have its leadership or its rank and file diminished and retired or moved to some other. They like what they are doing, some of them. Some of them see the bigger picture and others don't. Just like a soldier, a guy who's made his career as a soldier, a war is like the best thing out there. They love the idea of going to war. They enjoy it. That's what they do. I mean, I've talked personally to young men who joined the military expecting to be in a war, or conflict of some kind. I don't even know if you call them wars anymore, since they're not declared and they're illegal military adventures for profit. But anyway, they wanted to see some action. They wanted to kill some people. And they felt like, whoa, I never got to. It feels like, you know, I trained to be in the big game, big football game, and then I spent the whole game sitting on the bench and never got to play. That's literally how a lot of soldiers think. So this is the same way for a lot of people. The idea of a soldier, the metaphor of a soldier, is just one example. Unfortunately, this is sort of the way humans are all too often. They sort of lose sight of their original purpose. The original purpose of a soldier doesn't go to war because he wants to kill people. A soldier goes to war because he has no other choice. Because he's defending his country. He's defending his family, his wife, his kids, his grandkids, his parents, his way of life, his traditions, his culture. And these are about to be destroyed. There is no legitimate war unless it's a defensive war. And you never do it unless you're actually pushed into a corner to the point where you have no other choice. And what we're seeing now, of course, is that you have this growth of an ideology, an extreme ideology, very dangerous, and it divides people into two classes. You have the males who dominate, and then you have everyone else who doesn't dominate. They're second-class citizens, or third-class or fourth-class citizens. This is the way the Islamists are. They have, talk about haters, they really despise Jewish people, for one thing. They want to kill them. And I'm not saying that all Muslims are like this. I'm just saying this small group of devoted ideologues and all the people who work for them. And some of them, those people, they're just in it for the money. They're just looking for the paycheck or the fun, the adventure. There are some people who join in the military because they want the loot, they want the women, because in a war, men get to rape women, and some guys like to do that. That's their thing. The rules are gone. The cultural norms are gone. You can get away with all kinds of things that you couldn't get away with under normal circumstances. So this attracts one type of man. I hate to say it, but this is the way men are. Some men are. And people have to be aware of this. Men have been protecting their women and their children from other men since the dawn of time. And so when the Islamists see the European men or the American men not protect their women from them, not protect their children from them, and just back off and act like, well, that's not my responsibility, then the Islamists see the European men and the American men as weak. They're just namby-pamby, effete, inferiors. They're not only that, so you have this feeling like they don't know, they can't protect their women. I've literally heard this myself. They are so weak and so impotent, they can't even protect their own women. We're just going to take them. And we're seeing this happening now. And this is what Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she touches on this point, that any appeasement to their demands and not standing up for your culture is seen as weakness. And they're going to take advantage of that. Why not? So now we're seeing this huge spike in rapes in Sweden, in Germany, wherever, in France, wherever you have a large Islamist population. Again, not all Muslims are like this. They've done studies that something like 1 in 4 Muslims think that jihad is good, weapons are okay to use in the defense of your religion, various things like this. So if they're not directly involved, they understand, some of them, how you might need to do that, or you might want to do that, or you're justified. And of course, the Quran lays out the conditions under which you can kill an unbeliever, a kafir, an infidel, lie to them, you can beat your wife, you can, you're correcting her. As the superior being, you're allowed to correct her. And how women are not supposed to walk around unless they're accompanied by a male relative who's older, an adult, because they can't, they're inferior beings and they need to be protected. Well, the reality is, of course, is that these women are abused oftentimes, not always, but sometimes. And this is one thing that happened to Ayaan Hirsi Ali herself personally. She was the victim of sexual mutilation by her own family as a girl, a young girl. And she describes it very horrific, very painful, couldn't walk for 2 weeks afterwards. And of course, this makes pleasurable sex impossible. And that's the whole purpose of it, of course, because they don't have any faith that women will be have any loyalty to their husband at all. And so they want to make it as painful as possible. That's the justification, supposedly. And this is not strictly a Muslim practice. This is practiced by Muslims, but I don't think it is a result of the teachings of Muhammad. It's a tribal thing, but it shouldn't be practiced. And apparently it's very widespread in Somalia. She's from Somalia. Anyway, this is apparently developing into the major issue of our time. And we'll see how it all turns out. But I do think it's important that people should be treated with respect and as equals. Men and women should be treated as equals. And women have proven themselves over and over and over to be at least as capable as men. And in many cases, they're more capable. In some things, women are better than men. In some things, men are better than women. And we've seen this in our own society, coming from, let's say, the 19th century, in which women were expected to always cover their hair. This is in England, America, when they went out in public, and there were certain restrictions on their legal rights. They couldn't vote. There were restrictions on owning property. I'm rereading a very good book by Thomas Hardy called Far from the Madding Crowd, in which a young woman takes over the control of a farm in England in the 19th century. And she inherits it. And so she's sort of a bold woman, and she's looked on with surprise by a lot of the local people. It's unusual for a woman to have that much control and power, and they accept it. They accept it. And she has her own peccadillos, but gradually they work out, and it's a love story too. It's a beautiful book. But it does have the message of tolerance in it. We have to be tolerant for change. We have to be willing to go along with change. But is it change for the better or change for the worse? because change can go either way. So now we're seeing that there will be a change. Now, whether or not Sharia law will be instituted in substitute for democracy in France, in Germany, in Great Britain, in Sweden, in Denmark, in the Netherlands. You notice nothing is happening in Switzerland, by the way. Switzerland is where a lot of these people that I'm talking about who stay out of the limelight, the world's most wealthy people, this is where a lot of them are. They're in Switzerland. This is their little power center, right in the middle of Europe. And yet they have very strict border controls. You can't just move to Switzerland. You can't just do that if you want to. I think if you maybe had enough money, you might be able to. But they're very strict. They're not just going to let in just anyone. It's extremely expensive. When you go to Switzerland, you could travel to Switzerland as a tourist, but it is so expensive there. It is absolutely amazing. It is mind-boggling how expensive stuff is in Switzerland. So, and there's a reason for that. This keeps the riffraff out. That means you and me. That's who I'm talking about, you and me, pretty much. And Switzerland is not even a part of the European Union. That's odd. That the central country around which all the other countries would revolve in terms of financially, they have like one of the very highest, or maybe the highest financial standing in the entire world. Right up there with Monaco and a few other little tiny principalities around where the elite of the elite just like to hang out. Monaco is the playground of the super rich. Very, very sweet. You go there and you see how the rich, the super rich, actually live. And there's a few other places where they kind of hang out. In America too, where you go to the little beach community. They're not worried, by the way, by global warming. Many of the wealthiest people on the planet live right by the ocean. Why would that be? Why are they not concerned about sea level rise? You would think they would be, because people like Al Gore have been saying that the sea level was going to rise, I don't know, a minimum of 20 feet by the end of this century. And that would obviously put much of the land masses of the United States in different places around the world underwater. But yet, the wealthy don't seem to be concerned. Many wealthy people live right on the beach or close to it in Florida and other places. Do they know something we don't know? So we have to sort of look at this picture and we have to say, how does this really work? What is really going on in the world? We're told that things work a certain way. And if you go to the mainstream media, every media outlet will tell you the exact same thing. Oftentimes in the exact same words. They just repeat themselves. They have a playbook. They're all owned by the same group of people. There's like 6 major media outlets in the world. And they're all owned by the same group. The people who get together a few times a year and talk about, like at Bilderberg, what they're going to do for the next year. And they make a plan for that year. What do we have to concentrate on? What's our agenda? What direction will we take the world? Which war will we start? What country will we destabilize? Where will regime change happen next? What's the plan? They don't tell everybody what the plan is. And to many people who, and that would be most of us, 99% or more of the people on the planet, they'd have no clue what the actual plan is. But there is a plan. And the good news is that you have this ragtag group of alternative media outlets who look at all the news that is not covered by the mainstream media. You get the other side, and you will find out what that plan is to a large extent if you search. And for the moment, we have free access to the internet, although they're attempting to shut it down. They're using the idea of the fake news. But who is the actual fake news? That's the big question. Anyway, I'm about out of time. Enjoy your weekend and sleep well.